Hello there. In recent weeks, protests have erupted globally and people have taken to the streets over the murder of George Floyd and systemic racism and inequality, in all branches of society, including the police force. Although this channel is primarily dedicated to addressing the problems surrounding cults and indoctrination, particularly involving Jehovah's Witnesses, like many of you, I have despaired at recent events and tried to make sense of them. As we confront one of the biggest and most inflammatory problems of our generation, I feel now more than ever is a time to listen to each other, and we should especially be listening to those from Black and minority ethnic communities concerning their experience. With this in mind, I've assembled a panel of 5 ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who are also members of the Black community to hear their perspectives. Joining me is, I'm going to go from left to right. So below me on the screen, you'll see Fifth, who is a rapper. He's also my good friend, also known as Cliff Henderson. So top center, we have Ex-Cult Baby, otherwise known as Rudy B. Below her, we have Jay the Comedian, otherwise known as Jay Scott. To the right, top, we have my good friend and filmmaker, Javier Ortiz. And below Javier, we have YouTuber Jasmine Morales. So thank you, all of you, for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Good to be here.
Yeah.
So basically, as I said off air, I just feel as though my responsibility here is to just listen. So I've brought you on here to basically have the conversation. I want to know how you are, what your perspectives are on the Black Lives Matter movement from an ex-Jehovah's Witness perspective. So the floor is yours. What do you make of recent events, and how do you feel that what we're seeing at the moment relates to your experience?
Who would like to go first?
Yeah, I have one thing to say to open, which is just that it's kind of strange being here as someone who has only left the Jehovah's Witnesses in the last couple of years, going from like thinking Black Lives Matter to saying out loud Black Lives Matter is huge, just to start with, just to be able to like say that out loud, to be able to express that, you know, I don't think that we should even be able to call it politics, to just say that, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't like get brutalized and messed up all the time. By the way, am I allowed to swear? I didn't ask you that before and I forgot to.
What's that, sorry?
Am I allowed to swear? I do that a lot.
It's not the BBC, so I think okay. On an issue such as this as well, we can give you a lot of leeway.
So just to say, maybe we shouldn't fuck up Black people for no reason shouldn't be a controversial or political statement. And being able to say that out loud, like comfortably, is like a breath of fresh air. So that's where I wanted to open, is just that.
Well said.
I think I'll go ahead and second that. Thank you for opening it up that way. I think that's one of the many things I've never really spoken on, and I've never even really, up until recently, hadn't even really given a lot of thought to the fact that when you're passionate about whatever issues concerning social justice and things like that, when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're taught to not focus on that. There was even like a life experience of this Jehovah's Witness lady that was like part of the civil rights movement in some way, like in the 60s. I don't know if you guys remember that, like a few years
I remember that.
Yeah. And it was like, well, I realized that wasn't going to do anything. And then you saw her, being a witness. And it's just kind of like, when your experience is what it is, largely due to the color of your skin or whatever issues that you might be passionate about, have to, remain neutral. And you're not even, even in your heart, they say you're not even supposed to kind of take a side or take a stance on those types of things. So yes, I would like to echo those sentiments. It's very freeing to be able to do that and say like, I've you've dealt with certain things your whole life, but like now I'm actually able to speak on it and able to have an opinion and a strong opinion about it. So that's definitely nice.
Yeah.
I would add to that like the when you're a Jehovah's Witness, their ideology is kind of that weird see no color. We see no color. This is paradise on earth. Before paradise, we see no color. But anyone who's a Jehovah's Witness and is a black person or a brown person or any kind of person of color within the organization, half of your life you're out in the regular world. So how can these things not impact you? And the fact that you're unable to speak up about it, you're unable to talk up about it, you're really putting aside half of your life, half of your experience. So the conversations that I've had about this subject since I've left have they have been really impactful to me personally, and it's also opened my eyes to some of the bigotry that exists even within the organization. It's kind of unconsciously, but within other groups and my own family, for example. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I just wanted to add that to the mix.
I can agree. I can agree with that as well. I think, in the organization, you're really not allowed to have an opinion on anything really. But within the organization, there definitely does exist, racial issues definitely exist depending on where you're from. I mean, as a teenager, I moved from New York City. I lived in the Bronx to a small town in New Jersey. And I can say that when I entered the congregation, it was very different. I felt treated very differently, and I felt just like a little bit more suspicion. So it is nice now to be able to talk about an issue openly and really give my opinion on what's going on, and also to be supportive of what's going on vocally instead of having to keep all those feelings inside.
I remember when I was like coming up inside the Jehovah's Witness organization, there was always some protests and things going on in the Black community. We'd see it all the time, police brutality. And I always felt like when I was in the organization that was happening, but it was happening outside. It wasn't, I had nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? And I remember just always kind of just believing like, yeah, all that stuff is happening, police brutality and all the racism. I'm going to let them deal with that because we're in the organization. We're going to the system. It's all good. They ain't got nothing to worry about. I'm going to let them handle that because at the end of the day, it's nothing that nobody can do about it. Only Jehovah can fix it. That's how I felt, So by the time I actually left, and it's several things after you leave. It's just a bunch of like things that you didn't even think about. They just all come rushing back. You're like, oh wow, all those people who I died and I thought I was gonna see in paradise. Well, I don't know how that's gonna work. All these other emotions, like I didn't get the schooling that I wanted to get, and because you're always waiting for the new system to come. And that's when all the problems are going to be fixed. And when you leave the organization and you realize those problems aren't going to be fixed and you got to fix them, one of those problems is racism in America. Mm-hmm. You're actually like, oh, wow, I'm not outside of that. I'm actually in the fight. I'm actually a part of it. And I actually have a dog in this fight. And I need to do something to help make sure that it goes smoothly, So it was an awakening for me after leaving the organization and realizing that racism is something that's happening in America that I have to really address, because as of right now, I'm in it, baby. We all in it. And the thought of being a Jehovah's Witness and being outside of it is no longer there. So you gotta put our fist up and fight.
Mm-hmm. It's a really neutered response to be like, oh, well, Jehovah loves everybody, regardless of their color or whatever, and to just basically leave it at that. It's like, okay, yeah, in the new system, whatever, it'll be perfect. Nobody's going to see color, whatever. But right now, that's not the case. So are we just going to leave it like that or what? Is not do anything? The mindset of oh, it'll be fixed later in the best way, so we don't have to do anything now, is so lazy. Okay. And I recognize that now, but at the time it just seemed like a logical use of my time, because it was like, oh, well, it'll be ultimately fixed later. But it's like, yeah, but in the meantime, people are dying. So just do nothing until they get resurrected? Like, because I mean, it's like, even if you believe that all these people are going to come back and it's going to get fixed, even then, to just sit on your ass and do nothing right now, as if nothing is happening, is, you know, you're neglecting your responsibility as a member of society to just say and do nothing.
Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think it's so easy and the organization wants it to be that way? Like, I immediately go to like a more nefarious reason, but why do you think that is?
Personally, I think it's just it's literally just a matter of them monopolizing our time and our energy. Because if we get passionate about social issues and politics, then that's going to be something that takes away from all of our attention on the organization, all of our because the ideal Jehovah's Witness, the thing that they're the most passionate about is being a Jehovah's Witness, right?
Right.
So focusing on other issues, things that are important to you, things that affect you in the world, is taking away from that. And on top of that, I feel like you will have more of a connection to other people who are fighting for your cause than your fellow Jehovah's Witnesses, which is also a problem for them anyways.
Interesting. I always think it boils down similar to you, but like it boils down to controlling people's minds, right? Like if you're gonna have an opinion or you're gonna have an idea or you're gonna develop some kind of philosophy on these things, you have to give it thought. And if you're thinking that just doesn't jive with what they want. They want you to not think. They want you to be automatic. They want you to accept what they say as word without giving it any thought. And the minute you start to think for yourself and have opinions on these things is the minute that they can't control your mind anymore. Because
right.
I'm sorry, but it's hard to watch the stuff that we've seen on TV recently and not have an opinion, not have a reaction or an emotion to it. And I think you used the word stifling before. That's exactly what they do. Is they stifle just natural sentiment that you have as a human being. And if they can do that, then they can try to control how you think. But that's just my thoughts.
I was gonna chime in on that as well. I think what's interesting, and I would love to hear everybody else's experience on this, but what's interesting for me is that I feel like I experienced a lot of racism as a
Sorry, could I just interject? We're just getting lots of background noise on the live stream. So if you're not talking, could you just mute? I realize it's a bit of a pain having to mute and unmute between talking, but it's going to vastly improve the audio. Sorry, go ahead, Fifth.
Okay, and I guess this way it'll be easy to find out if it's coming from my computer, I guess.
That wasn't the intention, but go ahead. Yeah.
But no, I experienced racism and racist comments as a Jehovah's Witness, and interestingly, even working at the headquarters that they refer to as Bethel, and even outside of that, sometimes some of the other Black either Bethelites or outside of that, just witnesses, we would kind of talk about it a little bit, right? You can't go too deeply. Be like, man, did you hear what sister such and such said? Man, that was crazy, or whatever, right? Just kind of make a comment and try to like just roll your eyes and laugh it off. And like I said, even when I was when I was at Walk Hill, the headquarters, I remember comments being made about like Samuel Hurd, in relation to the fact that he was the only Black, governing body member, and different things like that. So I think, I was always aware, and I've been for many years, I was in congregations where I was the only Black person or one of maybe two Black people for years. Most of my adult life as a Jehovah's Witness, to be honest. So I guess being conscious of it, even as a witness, that part of it hasn't changed, being conscious of this issue, but my perspective and my ability to speak out against it, I guess, is the only thing that's really different.
Now that you brought that up, let's talk about Samuel Hurd, right? Like the token Black governing body member, because we all kind of knew he was the token Black governing body member, right? Like we all kind of had that in mind, like, oh, yep, the Black guy. Right. We have to have at least one. Like, I wasn't the
Yeah.
only one that kind of thought that, right?
I think a lot of us did, but again, in my experience, it wasn't something you said very openly, you know, especially at the headquarters. But again, there were, you know, subtle comments and stuff that kind of indicated that that's what was on people's minds. But I would agree with you on that.
Definitely.
I never forget the one time that it was my congregation was not predominantly black. It was all black. You know what I mean? Like, there was no white people in my congregation at all. And one of the brothers there, he went and started going to like suburban congregations and stuff. And he eventually met somebody who he was interested in dating. So he brought this sister to our congregation. It was a white sister. And I just remember everybody's reaction was like, oh, well, okay. And there was a bunch of stuff being said, but nobody was saying it. If you get that. I don't know if you understand that, but everybody had like a raised eyebrow and kind of like, oh, okay, what's going on here? Like, I'm just like, yo, I thought this wasn't a racist thing, you know, but it seems that race is playing a pretty important part in this conversation right now, just because this guy is interested in but why? And there was so many people like, why did he have to go out there to look for a wife? We got all these fine sisters here. And I just remember race being a pretty big discussion when that happened, you know? Like, for the most part, you go to assemblies, district assemblies, you see a bunch of white people. And for the most part, it's cool and whatnot. But I just remember this one event leading to so much, just like people like talking about race in not the greatest fashion, you know? It was a bunch of, like, if I've ever seen Jehovah's Witnesses keep a secret, this was one of the times I was like, wow, y'all really are keeping this gossip to yourself. This normally doesn't happen. But it was people saying, like, you know, don't tell nobody I said this and stuff. And it wasn't moving around like that. But I remember race playing a huge part in the congregation. But now that we're all out, right? Now that we're all out and we actually have to take a step into certain directions, as far as like the Black Lives Matter movement, man, it's a beautiful thing to watch. Just everybody around the entire world, the entire planet, coming together to actually get change. And it feels different. It doesn't feel like the other marches and stuff. It feels like people are actually taking it serious and actually putting forth legislation and making sure something happens and something changes. And this is big, I think, for Black people. And we need to all have some real tough conversations with each other and ourselves. Because I've seen some really powerful stuff in the last couple of days. I've seen this Trump rally where some Black Lives Matter protesters went to the Trump rally, which is like a no-no. And two things happened I never thought would happen. The first thing is that the Trump rally leader gave the mic to the Black Lives Matter protesters. Amazing. I would have never called that. And not only that, but when the Black Lives Matter protesters got on the mic, 90% of what they said, the Trump crowd agreed with. I was like, what? This doesn't make any sense. And it just showed that when people actually cut out all the noise and actually have a discussion, weird stuff happens. Like, people start agreeing and liking and wanting things to happen in a better way. So, yeah, that's just sorry for the rant.
No, that's what we want. We want some passion. And I think probably what the Trump supporters will have appreciated is a human face behind these struggles, because when you're hearing this get represented by others or on what they perceive to be the mainstream media, that's one thing, but actually seeing someone vocalize their experience, that's the whole reason why I've basically put this panel together. I do just need to very quickly thank some super chats. Rianne, Monica Owens, Alana Michelle, Margus Nee Jr. and Brody Nicolason. Thank you so much for supporting the channel with your very kind donations. Thank you. I suppose the opening exchanges have highlighted something very interesting, which is that from a Jehovah's Witness perspective, you're expected to just sit on the problem, aren't you? And it should probably be it's probably worth noting this on jw.org. They obviously had an article saying, is protest the answer? And interestingly, they initially showed a black person in the artwork, and then they changed it to white people in the artwork. But of course, the response to any problem, as from a Jehovah's Witness perspective, is always, oh, Armageddon's going to fix things. In other words, global genocide is the answer to any problem. We need to kill billions of people, and then everything's going to be okay.
Well, not us, Jehovah. Jehovah needs to kill billions of people.
Not Jehovah's. Thank you for making that distinction.
Jehovah and Toni Morris.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's why probably Jehovah's Witnesses are fairly unique. I mean, if you're having this conversation maybe as Mormons tend to be more politically involved, don't they? Whereas Jehovah's Witnesses have to get out of the political process entirely. And so I can imagine it's very liberating, as you said earlier, Rudy, to finally have a voice and finally say what's on your mind. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking as Jehovah's Witness experience, somebody asked me a little while ago, what was the first thing I did when I got disfellowshipped? I came out as pansexual on Facebook. That was the first thing I did. Like, literally just being able to immediately be like, you know what? There are no consequences for just being myself, except for, you know, I mean, like talking to other people, but nothing that is like written down in rules, you know, for just being yourself. That is such a huge thing of just being able to leave Jehovah's Witnesses, is just to immediately be like, guess I can just say what I actually think now. That's great. And it's weird to think that one of the things I couldn't say was just that, hey, racism exists and it's bad and we should probably do something about it. And what were you saying? What you were saying earlier about, you know, Watchtower saying, are protests really the way, is funny and also silly, because the protests that have been happening lately have been working. They have affected change. I mean, the officer that killed George Floyd and the other ones that were there with him probably wouldn't have been prosecuted, at least not to the degree that they are now, because the protests are happening, because people are saying, we see this happening and we are not going to sit quietly and take it. We're not just going to let that happen without saying something, without doing something. And that's the reason that change is happening. I mean, things don't change without people raising a stink. And imagining that the solution, as opposed to people just constantly raising a stink when bad things happen and trying to affect change themselves, imagining that the solution is just kill everybody who's doing it wrong. Just like, that's so authoritarian and insane when you say it out loud like that. But that really is their solution. It's just like, well, just kill everyone who's doing it wrong and then it'll be fine. No one will be left to be wrong. Like, that's crazy.
Well, not just kill everyone who's doing it wrong, kill everyone who doesn't follow this bunch of dudes, this bunch of mostly white dudes in New York. Everyone who's not following them needs to die. That's their solution, you know?
Yeah. And it's like, that clearly makes no sense. That like when you say that out loud in those words, it obviously doesn't make sense. But it's just weird that they would even be against protests, because they've protested things. They had a letter writing. They are not as politically inactive as they claim to be, because when it affects them, suddenly they start giving a shit. Yeah. That's all I have to say about that, because I'm ranting and I need to let somebody else speak.
Well, if it's okay, if I can just steer the conversation a little bit, one thing I'm really interested in hearing, especially, because here's the thing. This should not be a controversial issue. This is not a political issue, as has been said. This is an issue of, how do we treat our fellow human beings? Do we want to live in a world where there's inequality and racism? And so that, for me, isn't a political issue. And yet, by taking a very, what I consider to be uncontroversial stance on social media, what you see is all of a sudden, all of these people come crawling out of the woodwork saying, actually, there's this Candace Owens video, and actually, all white, all lives matter, and this is all a conspiracy by the mainstream media. I'm interested to hear you guys explain why it isn't a conspiracy and why racism and inequality is a day-to-day experience for you, you know?
Well, I do have something to say about that. This may be a little controversial, but it needs to be said. Racism itself is going to be really hard to tackle because racism isn't a tangible thing. It's not something that you can take and grab and hold. You know, it's a way you think. It's a way you behave. It's a way you treat people. You can make laws to penalize people for doing racist things and make, you know what I mean, like hate crimes and stuff like that. We've done that. We need to address what causes racism. You know what I mean? Like as far as in America, in my neighborhood, they like to throw Chicago out there because of how violent it is in Chicago, you know? But why is it violent in Chicago? Let's look at that. Anytime you take any group or any species on this planet and you put them in a small group and you give them very little resources, they're going to fight and hurt each other for those resources. That's any creature on the planet. Now, mix that with adding a ton of police officers in those neighborhoods. You got to remember, police officers, they're like vacuum cleaners. If I have a dirty house and I buy a new vacuum cleaner, it'll help me clean up the mess. But if I'm like, man, my house keep getting dirty, let me buy 30 new vacuum cleaners. No, you got to stop what's making your house dirty. Adding a bunch of vacuum cleaners is not going to keep your house from getting dirty. You understand? So the police problem is separate from the Black problem. We need to address wealth inequality. We need to address bad schooling. We need to address poverty, food deserts inside of neighborhoods, property values going low. All of these things cause people to behave badly because if you don't have the access to wealth or the access to education, you're going to do other things to survive because even though you don't have access, you still need to survive. So you're going to sell drugs, you're going to rob, shoot, steal, and do whatever it takes to make sure you can put food on your table at night or food in your kid's belly. So to address what's going on, we need to fix the problems inside of our community because there are a lot of things that we can't do, but there are also a lot of things that we can do. And to fight racism and the way we are perceived, the same way people like look at Chicago and look how violent it is, to fix that, we need to fix these communities, these Black and brown communities across the nation. So while, yes, racism is a real thing, I don't know if we can beat racism, thoughts and stuff like that, but we can beat what causes those things to happen.
I think it's a good point, Jay. I actually was interested to get your perspective because I know that you're in Chicago. And I know that you probably get a lot of questions like, oh, well, what about Black on Black crimes? And I get those questions too. And, you know, my general answer is, you know, well, no matter where you are, people, if they're going to commit violence, they generally commit them against each other. So it's not just exclusive to Black on Black crimes. If, you know, if white people are being killed, it's generally by other white people. So I don't really see that as a valid argument. But I think that you bring up a great point about getting to the roots within the communities as to why these things are happening. And, you know, if we can't fix racism, at least we can, you know, work towards making the next generation, you know, more positive and giving them more opportunities, whether it be through funding or whatever is needed, so that the communities within themselves are built up. So I really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, if I can add something to what was said. So as far as like, you know, fixing racism, to me, you know, racism, at least to a certain degree, is because of the way that people think, right? So it could be that somebody is not consciously, like I'm not, you know, people don't sit there and consciously say, well, I think Black people are inferior or whatever, you know, whatever it is. But perhaps there are other things that they do that kind of, or comments that they make that do kind of continue to like further a racist agenda and a racist system, right? That keeps certain people down. So I feel like even though, you know, you can't really police people's thoughts, I think that there's a lot of people who wouldn't consider themselves as racist, but because of what's been going on, I think people's, you know, consciousness have been awoken, and they're saying, wow, well, what am I doing proactively, like with my children, right? Am I making certain disparaging comments about Black people or different things like that, right? Like, and I do think, at least for right now, we'll see how much momentum this has, but I think for right now, at least it's good in that sense, right? I think in that way, that is a big part of the problem, you know, is people being aware when they talk about the term white privilege, which, you know, I'm not going to dissect right now, but when they talk about things like that, I think it's important for people to be aware and to, you know, even start to, what's the right word? Monitor, for lack of a better word, their conversations with other people, you know, like white people speaking to one another, and, you know, and different things like that. Like, you know, are those conversations helping, or are those conversations, you know, furthering to subjugate and furthering to promote this era of discrimination?
Yeah, I think a lot of it. Can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with the narrative that's out there, right? Because I've seen there's a writer, he made some posts on Twitter. His name's Michael Harriet, and he spit out a bunch of facts, right? Just statistics, and so the argument that we see a lot of the times is, you know, African Americans in this country, Black and brown people, you know, why is it that 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murders? That's not true, right? That's a narrative that's out there. That's just not factual. Okay, 13% of the population is not responsible for 50% of the murders. There's a small percentage of every population of white, Black, Latino that commits murders in this country, and so when it comes down to the problem of policing, I think the problem is that you have police officers, right, and law enforcement in this country is treating 3.5 or 3% of these populations, you know, in search of these murderers and these criminals and these people who commit the crimes. They're treating 100% of the population in a way that's not right, and it negatively impacts Black and brown people in this country. But that narrative needs to change, because this is what people like Candace Owens and people like that throw out there, that they say, oh, well, we're responsible for, you know, half of all the crimes. That's not true. And if people start believing that, then that kind of narrative supports the biases that they already have. And like you said, like this stuff, you know, racism is an idea. It's thoughts in people's minds, and it's hard to police that. But what we can control is the narrative. What are we putting out there for people to see? You know, because entertainment, media, all that stuff, this affects how people view their world. And if we're putting this kind of narrative out there and we're supporting it, or we're not doing anything to combat it, it's gonna propagate. It's gonna be popular. People are gonna accept that. It's gonna be that much more harder to have honest conversations with real numbers and with people to try to get them to understand things a certain way. So you know, I'm a filmmaker, so I personally have been very impacted by what I consume for entertainment. So that's another area that I've always tried to talk about is, you know, how do we see ourselves portrayed on TV and screens and in the media? Like, you know, we don't have access to a lot of platforms in the entertainment industry, but when we do, when we have a crack at the door, what are we saying with our content? You know, what are we putting out there? Are we showing Black and brown people in positive lights, you know, with careers as doctors and attorneys, or are they all gangsters? And you know, that all of that stuff has to do with how we see the world, and we need to start making an impact in that. So that's my rant. Sorry.
Don't apologize. It was a good rant. But I completely agree with pretty much everything that has been said on this panel. You guys all rock. I'm so happy to be here with y'all. And I guess I would say, as somebody who was raised, and I will say I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, so it's pretty culturally diverse. I have never, like, probably the only group of people that I can think of that I didn't see regularly enough for it to be surprising when I did see them was like Amish people. Like that's like the only group of people that I could think of that whenever I saw them, I was like, oh, that's different. But like I was surrounded by all kinds of races pretty much my whole life, and I never went to any congregations, and my dad was an elder, so he gave lots of talks out, and I was almost never in any congregation that didn't at least have a handful of people of color. Like, there was almost never, a lack of diversity in the congregations unless you went out into like the more like country areas or the more like but you'd have to go away from where I lived basically to see a lack of diversity. And even then there were still hints of that surrounding me all the time. But it was always more subtle. It was never like, oh, I didn't get privileges or whatever. One thing I want to address that I have seen a lot of people talk about, it was also brought up yesterday in your other live stream, Lloyd, was somebody accused you of having like white privilege, but what he was saying was your white privilege wasn't really relevant to what was happening. But I think that's something.
I think all white people have white privilege, but
yeah,
what
but
he
it
was
wasn't
saying
relevant.
was something along the lines of your comment shows your white privilege, and it really didn't. It
wasn't
bizarre,
relevant at all.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that needs to be addressed as regards to what Black Lives Matter means. When we're talking about, when we say Black Lives Matter, and I have said this like so many times in so many different ways, but it still needs to be addressed because apparently some people still aren't getting the message. When we say that, we literally just mean like, hey, society is kind of acting like we don't matter, and we're just saying we do. Like, there are people that, like, a lot of things, like Jay was saying earlier, all this different stuff in our society is kind of bent against us. A lot of things with education and with economical disparity. Like, there is a lot of things that kind of make us feel like we don't matter, and we're just saying that we do. Right. We're not saying other lives don't matter. We're not saying that we matter more. We're just saying we are particularly shit upon by society, and we want you to know that we matter. That's literally it. That's literally all that means.
Yeah, I've tried to explain that in every way. I've used beautiful metaphors and other things, and at a certain point, I think they know what we're saying.
They know.
The people who always respond with always, all lives matter. Two things: either they know what we're saying and they don't care, or if they were in our shoes and they had to say white lives matter because they were going through a lot of atrocities, they would mean only white lives. We don't mean that. We mean all lives matter. But right now, since we're particularly, like you said, getting kicked in the face, Black lives matter. If we were in a big group and we're all yelling all lives matter, but somebody's going through the group stabbing all the Black people, we'd have to pause and say, hey, guy that's stabbing all Black people, Black lives matter too, okay? Like, you understand that, you get that. So after this has been articulated beautifully by so many people on so many platforms, if you do not get it now, it's because you don't want to get it. So
you know what, Jay, the best reply to that I've seen so far, I can't remember who it was, but I know I read it. I think it was on Twitter, and it wasn't from a JW, Ex-JW, or anything like that. But someone said, do you want to understand what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter? And then they put the text, Matthew 18:12, that talks about the man who owns 100 sheep, and then one of them wanders away, you leave the 99 for the one. And I was like, that's it. Yeah. That's it. Because most of the people who will reply all lives matter are in some form of they're Christian, right? And it's like, listen, what better way to retort someone than be like, hey, you're Christian? Check out what Jesus said.
All sheep matter.
We're the sheep that are in danger. We're the ones that need the help right now, and we're asking for it. And we're not saying that the other sheep don't matter. We're just saying the other sheep are like safe on account of the fact that they are white sheep.
They're stretched out on sun lounges. Out on sun lounges and enjoying themselves in jacuzzis. And there's one that's missing or being, abused. So
we're being chased by wolves, and we would like some help.
Yeah.
I thought that was the best one, really, because it's like once you drop Jesus in the Bible, and these are usually Christians, they're like, oh shoot, how do I come back on this one? So we're going to find another text. Are you going to find another text where Jesus says, "Hey, actually, all sheep matter"? No, that you're not going to find that. You know, it's like, so to me, that has been my favorite one, and so that's what I'm going to do now. Whenever I see that, I'm just going to drop that text and walk away. It's going to be
that's my favorite one now.
I heard that one, so I'm gonna use that too. I like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have also heard that one. When I heard it, I was like, I love when people find Bible verses to back this shit up, because obviously the Bible doesn't always back that shit up, but sometimes it kind of does, because obviously the Bible is not congruent, so it contradicts itself. So you can find some points for and some points against, but if you can find some for, then good, use them.
A broken clock is right twice a day.
Right.
But could I just tag on to what you were saying earlier, Rudy, about Black Lives Matter? It literally just means Black Lives Matter. How could you possibly have a problem with that? And here's what I see happening on Twitter. I know you're on Twitter a lot as well. I think that there's a lot of polarizing happening, and there's a lot of people putting words in other people's mouths and saying things like, well, if you're on this side, your beliefs must be X, Y, Z. And if your beliefs are on this side, your beliefs must be X, Y, Z. And I think one of the problematic things on the BLM side is people are pointing to the BLM side and saying, if you believe Black Lives Matter, that must also mean you are in favor of a lawless society without police, and you are against history and heritage. And they attach all of these other things. And like, from my perspective, my beliefs about the police and what needs to happen with the police as a Brit who's not living in America are probably a bit more nuanced than my black and white approach of Black Lives Matter. That's like the central tenet, and everything else I consider to be, a matter of opinion. But that central thing of racism and inequality, I don't think that's something where you get to say, but do Black Lives Matter really? That's something that I think we should all be in agreement on. And everything else, I don't know what your thoughts are. Everything else is something that where we can have conversations.
I would agree with that point, absolutely. Like I think that anytime, if you're trying to have a conversation with someone, like really, if somebody posts, like, let's say it's on Twitter and somebody posts Black Lives Matter and somebody responds with, but this and this and this and this and this, that don't necessarily have anything to do with the statement Black Lives Matter, but may be associated with the movement, that's all an assumption. That is all an assumption. And even when somebody says all lives matter, I have known people who are totally progressive, totally on board with all that other stuff, but they might say all lives matter, not really understanding the implications of that, of saying that. So it's like, you just like talk to people, ask them what they mean, ask them, okay, you're saying that this is all, that this statement encompasses all of this, but you haven't actually asked me if I believe all those extra things that you added onto there. You haven't, you've just assumed that and worked from there. If people were actually talking to each other, that's kind of part of the problem with the slogans, I think, is because there's a lot that you can tack onto that, and other people who say that may not necessarily be the case. Like if I say like down with the patriarchy, there are probably other people that might say that who actually just hate men. Like they just hate them. And that doesn't agree with what I think at all. I'm in love with a man. I'm dating a man. My fiance is a man. I don't hate men, but I still think that, that systematic misogyny is a bad thing. So it's like this sort of slogan-y thing that we have, it makes it easier to convey what you think, but at the same time it makes it harder, because if somebody who doesn't agree thinks that it means a lot of other things, it's like we need to actually talk about exactly what we think and explain it. because otherwise you can make a lot of assumptions about what somebody else thinks, and it just does not lead to any kind of productive conversation at all.
Right.
I feel like what happens a lot of times with that is, you know, people that have those retorts, in my experience and just my observation, is that they don't necessarily want to engage in the conversation at all. They're just trying to dismiss whatever it is that you're saying, right? So, like, you know, if they, it's just, to me, it's just a way of distracting. Like, you know, I think people have different feelings about this, but the Colin Kaepernick protest, I think, is a good example. Like he said, he explained exactly what his protest was about. He said it's police brutality, you know, inequality in the system. And people said, well, he doesn't care about the veterans and he doesn't care about the flag and or the national anthem, which the national anthem is a whole nother conversation, maybe for another day. But my point is, it's that I think that's just something that people do just to, you know, just to make it so that your argument or whatever it is that you're protesting seems less legitimate, you know, as opposed to wanting to actually like talk about the issues.
Yeah, and that's a logical fallacy called straw manning, which basically means I'm going to make the weakest version of your argument and then take it down easily because it's obviously very weak. And I'm going to act like that's actually what you said when it isn't. So
see that happening a lot too. Like whenever there's protests going on, the protest constantly gets hijacked. Like you said, when Colin Kaepernick clearly said he was protesting police brutality, like you said, they said, "Oh, you're protesting the flag in America, huh? That's messed up, Colin Kaepernick." And like, no, that's not what I'm protesting. Even right now, with all these protests going on, I see people constantly only talk about all the looting and the rioting, and we're like, wait a minute, we're protesting police brutality. Let's focus on that.
Right.
Stuff that comes with it. You're wasting our time. You're not hearing our message still. You're hearing something, or you're paying attention to not the message. Stay on message. We're trying to get the message to you. And if you're sitting up talking about, oh, the protests and Antifa and Black Lives Matter, like, are you hearing the message? Because once again, well, the funniest thing is Dr. King once said the rioting and looting and all this stuff, that's what the people do who they feel they're unheard. When they feel like, you know, you're not listening, that's what they do. And I've seen that before. I remember I was it's kind of embarrassing, but I was with this woman and I would constantly, like, when she was talking, because she kind of talked a lot, I might like shift my focus. And she'd always, "Jay, are you listening?" I'm like, oh, my bad. Yeah, I'm listening, you know? But it's kind of like that. If we're trying to tell you something and we're telling you, hey, this is important to us. We need to address this. This is something that needs your attention. And you're like, yeah. We might need to slap you in the head. So you're like, hey, are you paying attention now? We just burned down your police station. You know, like, it's not cool. But at the same time, this is what people do when they feel like they're not being listened to. Yeah. And when you hijack a person's protest, when you're telling people that, yo, we're protesting police brutality, and you tell them that they're protesting America, you're not listening. And when we're telling you that police brutality is a problem, and you're telling us, oh, but look at all the rioting and stuff, you're still not listening. And when you don't listen, bad stuff can happen.
Yeah. I mean,
and I think those are the people that really just don't want to listen. They never really wanted to listen anyway. They just wanted to highlight the fault. They wanted to divert the attention away from what was actually happening. So, you know, as much as I like to, you know, be positive, I think some people are just a lost cause. They're going to, you know, believe whatever narrative that they want to believe and just focus on the things of the, you know, the looting, the rioting, and post nothing about the things that are actually taking place and what's happening, or even the positive impact of the peaceful protest.
Yeah. And to add to that, you know, I watched a lot of the back and forth and the conversations that happen online, right? And I made a mental note of the people who said nothing about that video when that officer had his knee on Greg Floyd's neck. They said nothing, but the minute there was riots and protests, they were all like, "Oh, what's going on?" And to me, that speaks volumes to me about how they perceive the world and how they interact with it. And my point on this is the rioting and the protesting. I think that's the most American thing about everything that happened, because I mean, Jay, you tell me, has there ever been any civil right that has been attained in this country that didn't come through some form of protest, rioting, or violence? I can't think of a single one.
Your country came about through protest. Just a historical point there.
As the LGBT person in the room, I sure as hell didn't get rights without that. I mean, shit, the first Pride event was a riot. It literally was the Stonewall riots. Like the first Pride was a riot. They were throwing bricks at police officers because they were, brutalizing them for no goddamn reason.
Do y'all remember the Boston Tea Party?
What's more American than that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're not going to take this shit anymore. Is American as fuck.
and I think what happens is some people will they will focus on what offends them. Yeah. And then it becomes clear that a man losing his life unnecessarily, regardless of what his rap record was or his history was with the police, that doesn't matter. He lost his life and he didn't deserve to.
Right.
People they will focus on what offends them. That man losing his life didn't offend them. And that's the problem, right? If you can watch that video and not sympathize and empathize with the people who are being hurt, that's the problem.
Or at the very least, it offended them less than destroying property, which is still a problem.
That's being generous.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's look, nobody wants to see businesses. Nobody, even the protesters don't want it. And you've seen it time and time again, where the protesters are stopping someone from vandalizing something or throwing a Molotov cocktail through a window or something. That's not what this is about. But because of those riots and the protests and the looting and the destruction, I think there is going to be change. And to me, there's nothing more American than that. Like, that's just a fact. But
I fully agree with that assessment. I think that it's funny because a lot of the people who are saying stuff like this are also the people that were like, oh, Obama's going to take our Second Amendment rights away and they're going to take all our guns. And it's like, what do you need the guns for? Oh, to protect yourself from the government overreaching? Well, the government's overreaching and we're protesting. And now you have a problem with that?
I posted something along those lines. And it was like all the people who are so hardcore Second Amendment, those should be the people between the police and the protesters. They should be standing right there because the
that's what they keep saying they have their guns for.
That's why they want them. That's why they hoard them. It's like, oh, in case the government ever turns on its own people, then where are you? You should be you should be the line between the protesters and the police. That should be you. But absolutely. No, it's about pretending to be that you're a character from Call of Duty 4, and that's all it is.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of pearl clutching going on in the UK. I just want to kind of tag this point because I've been so appalled by what I've been seeing on Twitter. You may be aware that a statue of a slave trader in Bristol was thrown into the sea, Edward Colston. And so what's happened is commentators on Twitter who've had nothing to say about Black Lives Mattering, nothing to say about the need for equality around the world and in America, have been jumping up and down no end about, oh, what about history? And this is mob rule. And people shouldn't be able to decide for themselves what statues they like and which statues. They are more upset about a statue that of a slave trader, no less. And no one's saying that this character this statue should be destroyed entirely. I was personally saying, well, why not put it in a museum where it can be contextualized and people can learn about what this man did? I'd be all in favor of that. But a plinth in a public place is for commemorating people. And so this is where, again, I think there's just been zero nuance and people understanding the difference between remembering and commemorating individuals. And I think, like you say, Javier, if people have nothing to say at all about racism, but statues is something that they can get upset about, that says a lot about them.
Yeah. by the way, how many of you have ever looked at a statue and been like, oh, I'm going to read all about that person now because they have a statue of them and I'm interested in the history of that person based on seeing this statue?
Never.
No? Nobody? That's interesting. Because
I did it one time. But it was a long time ago, and it had nothing to do with like a Confederate monument or anything. But there's a statue in Brooklyn of a World War I veteran, and I was in high school at the time, and I did do some research to find out what that was all about.
There's this statue in Chicago in Lincoln Park of like this naked Indian riding a horse, and I was like, why is he naked? You know, like that's not like battle gear. If you know, like you need at least a chest shield or something.
I'm going into battle in my loincloth. Yeah.
I'm like, hold on, fam. I like to learn his name. I went and I read the plaque. I didn't like do no whole lot of research, but I definitely read the plaque. I just hope that they would explain why he didn't have no clothes on, but they didn't.
Yeah, but the point of that is that the vast majority of people aren't learning their history from statues anyway. It's not like taking down a statue of General Custer who just, fucked up heinously is going to make us forget that he fucked up heinously because it's still in history books. And that's where we get most of our history.
Did they have a statue of Custer?
I don't know. I'm just giving an example.
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I really wouldn't either.
It's a bunch of Confederate statues in America that have been taken down left and right, and I'm all for that, because it's a symbol of racism. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like we are honoring this dude who was pro-slaves, and it's like you still want to honor that dude. Like I understand that the people who built the statue probably did, but are we still okay with that now?
Well,
like you committed treason. You went to war with your country and law. And we're like, he did fight good. You know what I mean? Let's show him.
Yeah.
No, where do we ever did that? Would we ever put up like a statue of Hitler? Germany did well in the war. Germany fought well. It was some brave Nazi generals or whatever. Would we ever give them a statue? No, because they're horrible. And they fought for a horrible reason. So why are we doing that for Confederate soldiers?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Germany, because after World War II, Germany went through a whole denazification thing where all the Nazi symbols were banned and prohibited. They wanted to cleanse themselves of like the worst era in the history of the German people. They actually
regretted it, though. That's the difference.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and the thing is, in this country, all those monuments that went up, especially in like public state capitals and buildings, they didn't go up right after the Civil War, after these generals died. They went up years later in the early 1900s when like Jim Crow was like really crowing in the South. They put this up. That was a taunt. They put these things up to be like, hey, look, you're still living in the South. You think you're free. You think you have civil rights. Look. Check this out. We're just going to throw this in your face. That's why those things went up. So, yeah, I'm not crying for any of those things going down. I guess, Lloyd, like putting them in a museum could be, contextual. Like it could, people can look at history and understand what happened. But those guys don't deserve monuments. They don't. And I've seen this other argument too, where they say, oh, well, what about when the Taliban was destroying these ancient artifacts out in Afghanistan and other? It's like, okay, that's an argument, but what they were destroying were the only remnants that you have of a historic civilization, a civilization that doesn't even exist anymore. And it's like you're talking about ancient artifacts. You should preserve those because you want to understand what happened. If those people committed brutalities, we should know about it. Just the same way that we should know about Custer, we should know about Robert E. Lee, but we shouldn't be putting up monuments to honor them.
Agreed. And also, ancient artifacts from the Middle East or wherever, there aren't people still alive who have themselves suffered due to those regimes, or whose perhaps parents or grandparents have suffered. I mean, even when we're talking about the Civil War, we're talking about fairly recent history, aren't we? That still has an impact on society today. When we're talking about battles that went on in ancient Mesopotamia or whatever. It doesn't evoke the same upsets that people would feel if, you know, seeing like you say, statues of Civil War characters from the Confederates. Definitely.
Yeah, nobody's walking around going, Genghis Khan killed my grandpa. You know,
Yeah, indeed. So this is just to kind of stress as well the whole aspect of white privilege, because one of the things that kind of is really kind of scorched onto my memory and which kind of informs the way I respond to this was my experience when I was pioneering as a Jehovah's Witness, and my pioneer partner, I think his father was from Belize, but he was of mixed ethnicity. And I can remember two clear occasions in my memory when we were approached by a policeman, and the policeman wasn't interested in me. He was only interested in Jared. I'll say his name, Jared. In fact, on both occasions, Jared was asked for identification. And I can remember on one of those two occasions, we were in the car and I was saying, you can look at my identification if you want. And I was trying to show him stuff. No, he was interested in Jared. And I look back on that now and think those policemen were racist, you know? There's no other explanation as to why they would be only interested in Jared and not interested in me. So I'm interested to know, I guess, how much of that stuff has gone on in your lives or in the lives of people you care about, you know?
I have a very distinct memory of something very similar happening to me. My grandparents, several years back, moved all the way from Ohio to Arizona. And we went to visit them one time. And obviously that is across the country, so we took a plane. And I am of mixed ethnicity. My brother and sister are both of mixed ethnicity. My mom is Latina, but she's white passing. Like her mother is white and her dad is Latino. So from her side, it's mostly just white. And then my dad is African American. So he's like the darkest person in our traveling party. And then me and my siblings are all about my shade. And then my mom is pretty much white. When we were going through TSA and all of that, while we were walking through, he got stopped and he had to be detained and searched for a bit. And we were all just sitting there like waiting. And it was one of those things again, where as a Jehovah's Witness, it's like, you kind of, you know, but you're not really going to say it. Like you could all look at each other and be like, yeah, that's why this is happening. But you're not going to say it out loud because you can't get involved in politics and all that. But we all knew it's like, oh, it's because our dad is black. And even though his kids are black, we're also all children and we're significantly less dark. And that was just like, it was plainly obvious and we all knew it, but nobody acknowledged it. And we just kind of moved on like nothing happened. But we all knew what had happened, really.
Well, I think, and I have some stories about that too, but I think in this country, Lloyd, you're looking at it from a person who lives in Europe and grew up in England.
Yeah.
But I don't even have to guess, but I'm sure that I can ask Jay and I can ask Cliff, hey, tell us about a time, one of the times that you got pulled over by the cops, and they'll have a story. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that's true. So I'll let them speak to it first.
The story happened. So it was this place, it was called the Barber's College, right? And it was where a lot of young black men went to learn how to cut hair. And I could go there and get my hair cut really cheap because there's a really good chance I'm going to get a really bad haircut. But anyway, I went there, right? Me and my friend. And after we get our hair cut, we wait outside of the store for his mother to come pick us up. At the time, everybody was sagging their pants and they had on like these vests or whatever. It wasn't a real bulletproof vest, but it was like kind of bulletproof looking vest, right? I'm young, dumb, you know how it goes. So I'm out there and 4 squad cars pull up, just whoop, right? And me and my friend like, oh, somebody's in trouble. And they said, take your hands out your pockets. And it was like just me and him. So we take our hands out our pockets, and they turn around, they put me on the glass, right? And when they did that, they were going through my pants. Like I said, my pants were sagging a little bit, and this guy was so aggressively checking me that he was pulling my pants and my underwear down. We're outside on, I don't know if you ever been in Chicago, but 42nd Street is a busy street, and everybody looking at these 4 cop cars, and my butt cheek is almost hanging out. So I go to pull up my pants, and he said, "What you reaching for?" Takes my head, smashes it against the window, cut my face a little bit, blood coming out or whatever, and then he throws me to the ground. Remember, I was just trying to pull my pants up because I didn't want nobody seeing my butt cheeks, but he did this, put his whole weight on my body, like on like my back, but I could feel it in my chest. It was kind of hard to breathe. You know, I was just, at this point, I was scared. I just like, man, this dude's about to shoot me. Put me in handcuffs, and then a call came over the radio. We didn't hear the call, but he stood me up, took the handcuffs off. They all got in their cars, and they all split off. Nobody told us what happened. Nobody. I'm sitting there, face bleeding, scared out of my mind, pants hanging down, and nobody even told me what happened. That doesn't happen in Caucasian neighborhoods in Chicago. And I know that because when I lived in Joliet, it was in a predominantly white neighborhood, and they were speeding outside, just speeding. They got pulled over. All 5 cars got pulled over by one cop car. And he gave them all tickets, but he was like the most respectful and nice. I'm like, what? If this was my neighborhood, I know we've been all outside. I've been there all outside just because I was outside on the curb with our hands behind our back. I'm like, he never even asked anybody to get out the car. it was, oh my God. But yeah, that's my story.
Wow.
Clip, let's hear it.
Well, okay, so to be honest, I've never had an encounter that resembled anything like that. I will say though that so I've been a court interpreter since I was, I think, 21 or something, maybe like 22, but anyway, early 20s. And so I've always carried my interpreter badge, which says court and everything on it. So like usually I will start with that when I've been approached by the police, and there's definitely been some questionable, to say the least, stops that I've had where it was like, oh, I stopped you because you turned left and then you made a right turn through a neighborhood, like just kind of this very strange things along those lines. And it's like, huh? And I'm in a suit, because supposedly that's something that makes a big difference. But no, I don't know how much my suit has helped me usually because that's how I have to dress for work. But anyway, but yeah, usually I'll start with, I'm an officer of the court. I kind of throw that term out and say like, I'm I work in court or whatever. And so anyway, I like to feel like that possibly has assisted me in any way. But no, I can't say that I've had anything scary where I had guns drawn on me or anything like that. But I do know a lot of people that have. Like, I have a lot of friends and cousins and a lot of stuff, like that. And I think just briefly, I know this is not exactly what we're talking about, but I think that's one of those things that we have to realize, especially when you have, even if they're Black people that say like, this is not a problem, this doesn't happen, right? Like if I were to say that, like, because I've never had a police officer, tell me get out of the car and pull a gun on me and blah, blah, that this is not a thing. This whole Black, this police brutality against Black people is not a thing. Like, no, like, listen to all of the people and their stories. Like I said, I know a lot of people myself. And if you asked around, you would find that a lot of people have had those experiences, or, so basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is the fact that certain ones of us have not had that experience to that extent does not at all mean that it's less of a problem, or that the fact of police brutality is not, valid.
What about you, Jasmine?
I agree with Cliff. I haven't exactly had that experience where I was ever in fear for my life at any point with the police. I do remember a situation where when I moved from New York City to the small town in New Jersey, that my parents lived in a gated community, and I had some friends waiting for me at my house, and they got there before I did. And when I got there, I was greeted by 2 squads of cop cars for about 3 guys that were hanging out, just, kind of roughhousing a little bit, but, nothing crazy. It was maybe 2:00 in the afternoon, bright, sunny day, and 2 police cars were like swarming the street of where I lived at. And they were questioning what they were doing there. And then, I explained to them that I lived there, and then it all went away. But it was, if I hadn't lived there, who knows, what could have taken place or what would have happened. And it also made me realize that people that were on my street, that my neighbors that were supposedly friendly, that say hi to me every single day, say hi to my parents, that they obviously were the ones who called because the police were responding to something. So people that were smiling in my face were still looking at my family and those that we chose to associate with suspicion. But to Cliff's point, even though personally I haven't had an experience where I felt that my life was threatened, pretty much everyone that I know, every male of color that I know, has had an experience that, that they were fearful or something happened with the police that was not pleasant. So it's not valid to say that it doesn't exist. It absolutely does exist. Just because it hasn't happened to you, just the fact that we all know someone where that has happened to them shows how valid it is.
So I'll share. I've had several encounters, but this was back. I was about 21 years old, and for some reason, I grew up in Brooklyn, right? And for some reason, in my 20s, I got really into skiing, and that was like a weird thing. But
I'm imagining you in your neon ski suit, have you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do have a neon ski suit. But I went out and I bought myself these Eddie Bauer fleece jackets for skiing, right? And I had a red one that was like Jay's sweater, like that color shirt. And this was around the time where in New York, we were starting to get influence from like the gangs that were out of the West Coast. So like the Bloods and the Crips. And I was going to work. I used to work at night, and I was going to work. And right before I walked into the train station, a patrol car, like I could hear the engine roaring, like jumped up on the curb through the handicap ramp. And like I had to move out of the way because he would have hit me. And the cops come out with their guns in hand, and they're like, "Get against the wall! Get against the wall!" And there was like a KFC right there, and I put my hands against the wall. They took off my backpack. They opened up my backpack. They spilled everything on the floor, and they searched me and they frisked me. And I was like, "Hey, I'm just going to work, I'm like, I work at night. I'm just going to work." And they're asking me all sorts of questions. And it ended up they saw my badge from work and my ID, and then they just got in their car and they drove off. I had to pick up all my stuff and and then go to work. So that was normal, right? That happened all the time. But the next day, the same 2 cops on the same corner on my way to work again did the exact same thing. And I even told them, like, you guys stopped me yesterday. Like, they're like, shut up, and they were just messing with me. And I stopped wearing that red fleece after that because it kind of hit me that it was like, okay, maybe it's because of this red jacket. So I turned it in and I got another one. I got a blue one, which is a dumb idea if it's about Bloods and Crips. But it never happened again. But what I want to say with this story is I remember telling this story to my coworkers, and one of them was white, and he didn't believe. He thought I was making this story up. Everybody else understood that this was normal in this neighborhood where I lived, where I grew up. It was normal that this kind of stuff, these kinds of interactions with the police happened all the time, and everyone had some kind of story. But this guy who grew up in, I think he's from Scarsdale, north of the Bronx, he thought I was making the story up, and he had a police officer brother who was in the force, and he called him up and told him the story, and his police officer brother was like, "Nah, that would never happen." And I was shocked that they would not believe that was true. And so, we were talking about white privilege earlier, and that's the privilege, right? Is you can't even imagine that would happen in your neighborhood. You're lucky if your neighborhood's so dope and the cops are so dope in your neighborhood that you can't imagine something like that happening. When there are people in neighborhoods all over the country where this is normal, this is day to day. If I told this to my brother, if I told it to someone else, they were like, "Oh, that happened to me the other day. I was just getting a coffee, and they have a story." Like, that's where the privilege part comes from. And so, like, we have to accept that one, some people don't have to deal with these problems, and that there's a group of people that do, and this group of people are the ones who are speaking out about it now. And I think
the stop and frisk era.
Yeah, that was in the middle of the stop and frisk era, and I have probably 3 more stories about getting stopped and frisked, and I don't know any white person in New York that can tell me their story about stop and frisk in New York, because, to be honest, it was, there's numbers now. Now we have numbers of who was stopped and how often, and there's statistics to measure all this stuff. So, I'm not just pulling this out of the air. This is something that we can back up with facts and evidence. But
I think that's really interesting. I think that's really interesting because I've assembled this panel without prepping any of you regarding what stories to tell or anything like that. I just wanted to hear your stories, and I've assembled 5 ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who I know, who I'm friends with, whose work I admire. And already out of those 5, I've heard one talking about their neighbours effectively calling the police because she'd moved into the community. And I've heard 2 stories of being basically assaulted by the police just for walking down the street. Just for walking down the street. And when we're talking about white privilege, here's what I know my next encounter with the police will be. It will be due to speeding, or it will be due to some other traffic violation, and it will be over very quickly. And the worst that will happen is that I maybe have to pay a fine. In most cases, they'll just wave me on. That's white privilege. But you're talking about literally just walking down the street and being ambushed. And I've assembled a panel of 5 people, and 2 have had that story. And that alone, for me, says it all, Yeah.
As far as... Oh, go ahead, Jay.
I'm sorry. When I worked at my last job, it was pretty much like 90% all white employees. And I was there for 19 years. And when most new white employees would come would just get hired newly there, they'd ask me where I'm from, because I talk different than everybody. And, like, okay, you're definitely not from a northern region of Chicago. So where are you from? And then for the most part, even though they ask me, they know where I'm from. I'm from the south side of Chicago. It's either the south side or the west side or the east side, But they know that, I'm one of those areas, but predominantly south side of Chicago. And I've gotten this question a lot. Have you ever seen somebody get killed?
Oof.
I get that question a ton. And it always, I find it funny usually, but in the back of my head, I'm kind of mad that they're asking me that. Like, come on, you wouldn't ask any of your white coworkers that. And the thing that's even more infuriating is that, yes, I have witnessed somebody get murdered in my neighborhood. I've witnessed it. So the fact that you would ask me that, and the fact that my answer is yes, it's infuriating. It means the whole system is messed up. It means that you know exactly what's going on. And it's crazy because, like, I've never gotten a speeding ticket in my life. But yet I've been in the back of a police car several times. I've never been arrested, though. I've never actually went to jail. But in my neighborhood, on the south side of Chicago, Inglewood, if you were outside and there was a bunch of people, even if you wasn't with that people, let's say you were just walking by and the cops roll up, we didn't have stop and frisk, but they did have something called jump out boys. That's when the detectives, usually not the uniformed cops, they hop out of these black cars and they have everybody get on your knees. Everybody. If you're around, you're getting on your knees. You're getting put in handcuffs. And if anybody has anything on them, y'all going to the station. What's crazy is that since I was a Jehovah's Witness and I couldn't hang out with a lot of people, for the most part, if I were able to explain that and got away with it, they let me go. They say, like the game bangs, oh, Jay, he ain't with none of this stuff, right? And it would give credence to the Jehovah's Witness organization, you know? People like, oh, see, Jehovah saved you. I'm like, well, I mean, sometimes a coat can come in handy, but for the most part, it was very
coat privilege.
Coat privilege. Little coat privilege, a little bit, just a little bit. But these are normal stories. Put in handcuffs. A lot of the white people I talk to have never been put in handcuffs. I'm like, you never? Like, never. You're like, well, sometimes we do it on purpose. But I'm like, I mean, like, the police, like, I've been in handcuffs at least 7 times that I remember. And
we're talking about police encounters at this point and not your private life.
Yeah, just you don't want to talk about the other people.
Yeah, I've never been put in handcuffs by police, but
but seriously, like I've been in handcuffs. I've been in the back of cars. I've been disrespected by police. I've been, like I said, pushed face first to a glass window, thrown on the ground. The disrespect. Before they had body cameras, the Chicago police to the Southside Chicago residents were disrespectful. I mean, I don't even want to go into it, but I'm glad we got body cameras. I'm glad that there's some accountability as far as like what's going on with police. I'm glad that these marches are happening because right now people all around the world are bringing attention to a situation that 100% needs it and it needs to be addressed. And I'm glad that it's happening. And I'm glad all y'all are out here fighting, man.
I wanted to bring up something about white privilege that Lloyd was saying earlier. And you were saying how, you know, some people have never experienced what a lot of us have gone through. And you know what? As somebody who is light-skinned, there's a lot of stuff that you guys have talked about that I haven't gone through, and I still believe you when you say that it happens. That, I think...
Something?
Oh. Oop. Look, sounds like Cliff's lost some audio. But, But the point that I'm trying to make is, like, it's not even a matter of... It doesn't have to be a matter of privilege to at least acknowledge that other people have it worse than you. It's a matter of empathy. Like, you know, with the Me Too movement, it's like, all we're asking you to do is believe women. Like, just like when someone tells you, I've been raped, just literally all you have to do to support them is just believe it when they say that happened to them. Because there's so many people who don't. And there are people who are in a place where they haven't seen those kind of things happen to Black people, so to them it just doesn't happen. And it's like, why do you really think we're all just standing around bitching and moaning and making shit up? Is that really what you think? Do you really just not and it blows my mind that there are people that are so lacking in empathy to that degree, because there are plenty of white people that can say, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I know that hasn't happened to me. And I know it's because of my skin color. And that's literally all you have to do is just acknowledge it. And there are some people that they can't even do that. They can't even acknowledge that exists, which is just crazy to me.
Where do you think all this is going? Because that's one thing that I hear sort of the other side say is, and anyway, what's the end goal? What objectives do you have? I know that we started off by saying that there has been progress already. You'll notice the backdrop of the live stream is the words Black Lives Matter, just a few meters away from the White House. I consider that to be an achievement. You've also got the officers responsible for George Floyd's death being prosecuted. So we're seeing definitely some tangible improvements, but I'm going to be honest, I struggle when I look at the political landscape right now with both Britain and America, I would say, in the middle of strong lurches to the right in terms of politics. You have a very, very right-wing president in America. What's the path forward? How do we take this this marching for justice and make it translate into meaningful change?
A lot of things. Oh, you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of things that I have seen and have supported as far as tangible changes that can be made. More police accountability. Basically, if you cover your body cam, you are automatically charged with tampering with evidence. Like, period. Because those body cams are there for a reason, which is to hold you accountable for what you do. So essentially, if you cover your body cam up or turn it off, then you did something. That should be assumed. So hold accountability for one thing. Another thing that I have seen a lot of people talking about is basically diminishing the role of police, as far as like not every problem needs to be addressed with putting somebody in handcuffs. So just because a lot of the issues that come up could be dealt with by a social worker, realistically. Like maybe a social worker who has protection with them so that they aren't violently damaged. But realistically, a lot of these things could be handled with de-escalation, and police just don't have proper training for that. And that's another thing. I think that police should have a lot more training. I've probably spent more time in my life playing Animal Crossing than police officers have in training. Like, honestly, which is just embarrassing. I mean, they should be trained more, because there are lots of cops that come out anytime something like with what George Floyd happens and says, that's not protocol. That's not how it's supposed to be handled. And it's like, well, clearly they didn't know that, or they were ignoring that protocol. I think that there has to be much more rigorous training and more emphasis on de-escalation and rehabilitation and actually helping people as opposed to ignoring people. And now that I'm talking about this, I guess I'll bring this up. A lot of the, chants for defund the police are not about just being like total anarchy. It's about the fact that a lot of the things that police are supposed to do, they're not doing anyway. So we should put people that are more suited to that position, because a lot of things aren't really going to be handled by somebody with a baton and a gun and handcuffs. Like, you can ask almost any rape survivor if the police were helpful to them, and they will probably tell you no. Like, that didn't help them, because they don't understand that. They don't have the training, they don't have the education to handle those kinds of cases. There are so many things that come down to psychological and sociological problems, because that's really where deviant behavior comes from at the end of the day. People aren't just out here like, I'm gonna fuck some shit up today. So just slamming some handcuffs on them and throwing them in jail isn't going to change that. Okay, my rant is over.
No, I was going to add to that. So if your question is what do I think is going to happen, and where do things need to go,
basically,
for all of this to make sense?
Because from where I am, it's not looking great with Trump basically fanning the flames of what's happening. I mean, he seems to be almost enjoying what's happening rather than trying to reconcile and find a path forward.
Well, from that point, the first thing that needs to happen is we need to vote. People need to go out and vote, like not just on the presidential elections. They need to vote locally. They need to speak through their vote, because let's face it, Trump is in office because voter turnout was lower than the previous election. He would not have won if more people would have gone on and vote. Like that, those kinds of policies are not the majority in this country. We're split in a lot of different ways, but that, you know, his approach to governing is not the majority in this country. Most people don't agree with that, and we need to voice that by going out and voting. So, you know, the people who stand across the protesters and yell "All Lives Matter," who post, you know, hold up the Confederate flag, who defend the not taking down these statues, all those people are online to cast their vote when election time comes around. And we need to do the same thing. And then the other thing, I hope that this happens, but I think it needs to happen as far as policing. And I've had these conversations with my brother just recently. Like, you know, we'll sit and talk about this stuff. But the culture of police needs to change. Like this like you never hear when a teacher, you know, you have those scandals where a teacher has sex with a student, right? Teachers don't go out and say, "Hey, teachers' lives matter. You know, we're not all like this teacher." No, they go out there and they say, "Hey, look, that teacher does not represent us. Like, we need to get rid of that teacher. That teacher should never be allowed a teaching credential and the ability to teach anywhere else ever again." Right? Doctors who commit and nurses who do malpractice or commit crimes. Other doctors don't come out and say, "Hey, you know, we got to stick up for all of the other doctors." No, like they say, that dude does not represent us. We don't want him representing us. Take away his license. He'll never practice again. Nobody says, fuck the fire department. There's nobody yelling that out in protest, right? Because, okay, so I think what needs to change is that culture within the police department. That when an officer, I mean, you have him on videotape. You know, Dave Chappelle commented on this. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. This guy was kneeling on this on Floyd's neck. Other police officers need to say, "Hey, that's not us. That dude does not represent us. We want him out." And then that should be the culture. And I think you change that by making sure that district attorneys are not the ones investigating police officers who commit these crimes on the job. Like, there should be independent investigations done that are not connected with two groups of people that constantly work with each other and rely on each other. So that needs to change. And when that does, then I think we would have made progress. But I just want to say one more thing to my rant. There's also this kind of idea that like this conversation that we're having here, right? Some people, and I understand the frustration, but some people will take the point of view that, no, you know, we should not have to explain to white people why this is wrong and why this is an issue. And I don't think I don't agree with that, because I think we should have these conversations. Like, it sucks that we have to explain this a million times, but we should have to keep explaining this until it changes. If there is no change, if change hasn't come fast enough, then we need to keep working at this. And the reason I believe this is the people that we look up to, the Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and all these civil rights leaders from the 60s, they took bullets. They died because they would not shut up. People could not make them shut up about speaking to this. You know, Martin Luther King sat in a room with Robert F. Kennedy, who he knew had authorized the FBI to bug his hotel rooms and was sending recorded messages to his wife. He sat in the room with these people and he negotiated things because he knew that that was the only way to advance his movement. And so, no, we should not stop talking about this. We're gonna butt heads with people. We're gonna find people that don't understand what we're talking about. But we should not take the position that it's not. I'm sick and tired of having to explain these things to people. Yeah, we are. We are sick and tired of having to explain these things to people. It is frustrating. It is tiring. But those guys took bullets because nobody could shut them up, and they would not stop explaining. And we should honor that by not quitting on it. You know, we should keep talking about it. Any chance there is to make an ally, we should be fighting, you know, to earn that. So that's it. I'm done.
Beautiful.
I'll shut up.
Thank you. Well, if that's exhausted everything that everyone has to say, basically,
my bad. I didn't mean to go. I just, you know, I gotta go. Sorry, man.
No,
No, that was a great way to wrap it up.
I got one thing I want to add. One of the things that we could do to fix this problem is to defund the police. Now, when I say defund the police, I don't mean get rid of the police, because if they're the naked man covered in his own dookie with a knife, I don't want to have to deal with them. I would like to call somebody else to do that. But the police do not need tanks and bombs and all this other gear to police a neighborhood properly. Take some of those funds that go to the tanks and missiles and stuff and give those to schools to better educate these young men and women, to give them more options than committing crimes to put food on their table. The best police station should look as good as the worst school, because that's where you stop the need for all these police and stuff. Once again, they're vacuum cleaners. We don't need a vacuum with all the attachments, because that's not what's going to keep the place clean. Us making sure we invest into schools and neighborhoods is what keeps the neighborhood clean. So, once again, I don't even want to say defund the police. Let's say advert some of those funds to the schools. Let's make sure our schools and stuff looks great, because I've been in some really nice police stations, but I've been in some really bad looking schools. You know what I mean? So, with that said, that's just something that I think that we could do right now to fix some of these problems, and it will come by voting and putting the right people in office who's willing to, put our interests first. So get out there and vote. Make sure that we can divert some of those police funds to schools and community centers and after school programs and programs where people can have child care so they can go to work and make money. We need that. We get that, we'll have less crime. We have less crime, we'll have less police interactions, things will get better. So that's all I had to add.
Thank you. Well, that kind of in a way answers my earlier question about, the kind of secondary arguments to Black Lives Matters, surrounding the police. Would it be fair to say that when you say defund the police, what you're really saying is the police urgently needs reform, including the way public finances are used? Would that be?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make your message more palatable, basically, to those who are saying, "Oh, the Black Lives Matter movement is that they're for anarchy and they don't want any control or anything like that." But it sounds very reasonable when you actually explain what it is that you're looking for, and it's true. There is enormous injustice in the way public funds are used. I would say probably one of the most pressing matters in America right now, apart from the fact that you have the biggest prison, a ridiculously large prison population that's disproportionate in terms of the global prison population, is the fact that you guys spend so much money on the military that could again be being invested in education and improving society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Exactly that. Yes.
Agreed.
Well, now that we've covered,
I do want to say, I'm sorry. I also have finishing words that I want to say.
Please do.
Even if somebody is out here saying, you know what, by defund the police, yes, I absolutely mean I want anarchy in the streets. I don't want the police because police are killing people. If you are someone who is going to look for and take the word of the most extreme people in a group, a diverse group of people who all have different ideas and different opinions about how these issues are going to be handled, if you are only paying attention to the most extreme people in that group, that's still a straw man argument. Because if the vast majority of people in that group would look at that person like they were crazy also, you can't just say that that person represents the whole group. It doesn't work that way.
Agree 100%. Great point.
Yeah, well, and I just want to just say, if I've been silent for a while, I've been having audio issues for the last 10 minutes. So anyway, but what I did hear sounded like people had some really good ideas, but it was cutting in and out. So I just apologize about that.
No problem. Well, I've really enjoyed listening to you all. It's certainly, I think, been very eye-opening, or at least I hope it's proved to be eye-opening for my viewers. I do just need to quickly do some shout-outs, because we had some incredible super chats coming through. probably you're aware, this is only my second live stream in 3 months after I was banned by YouTube. But Nicole Mort Parker, Anonymous Fon, Red Boy, Julia Del Vecchio, Trigger Woods, Liplock No More, Southern Skeptic, and Cindy Arnold. Thank you to all of you for your very generous support of the John Cedars channel. Very much appreciated. Thank you. But what a wonderful panel. Again, it's really been very helpful to hear your perspectives as ex-JWs and as people from the Black community, just to learn more about this. And I hope that it will lead to more nuance and more compassion when we're talking about these issues.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for having us on, man.
Thank you so much for having me, Lloyd.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lloyd. Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone else.
I would applaud you as an ally for using your platform to platform us to talk about this issue in the first place.
Agreed.
Because you definitely have a bigger YouTube channel than any of us. So
yeah.
I just see it as a human issue. And I also frankly think that ex-JWs should be uniquely positioned to have compassion on this subject, because we understand what unfairness looks like. We understand what it means for the system to be rigged against us, to be abused by people in power. So I don't frankly know how you can be an ex-JW and not see a cause worth fighting for here. It's a human cause. It's a human rights cause. So I think everyone should be behind it. And I'm just grateful to be in a position where there's a large audience that I can at least feel like I'm doing something. And it's only through, again, you guys coming forward. Thank you, Rokio Luna, for your super chat. It's you guys coming forward and speaking out that's making it all worthwhile. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lloyd. And it was great to meet everyone too. Thank you.
Oh yeah, it was great to work with all of you and have this conversation. It was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Drop a line if you're ever in Chicago.
Fifth and Jay the Comedian and Javier have been on my channel a lot, but and I know, Jasmine, you've been on once before. Rudy, you haven't. This is your first time on the John Cedars channel,
and it was a long time coming.
I need you on more. I really do. I do apologize, yes, but hopefully this is the first of many meaningful conversations. So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I know I have. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such conversations. And as always, thank you for watching.